Information goes in, gets stored, retrieved when needed. More storage equals more knowledge. Your brain is a hard drive. Learning is downloading data. That's memorization, and it's completely wrong. Hold up the tree branches. This is how learning actually works. New growth branches from existing structure. Each new piece connects to what's already there. The tree grows stronger, more capable, more integrated. Nothing is stored in isolation. Everything is connected, living, growing. Put them down. Richard Feynman understood this. He never memorized, not because he couldn't, but because he recognized that memorization isn't learning. Memorization is storage. Learning is growth. And that distinction, that fundamental difference between storing information and growing understanding, that's why he could solve problems others couldn't. Why his knowledge was usable instead of just recitable. Why decades after learning something, he could still apply it. A direct address or right now, you probably memorize. Not because you want to, but because that's what you were taught. School taught you to memorize. Tests rewarded memorization. Success meant retaining information, and it's destroying your ability to actually learn. Because every hour spent memorizing is an hour not spent building understanding. Every fact crammed into storage is knowledge that will disappear within weeks. Every test passed through memorization is education wasted. Today, I'm going to show you how smart minds actually learn. Not through memorization, through something completely different. Something that creates understanding that lasts, knowledge that's usable, capability that grows over time. Because memorization is not just inefficient, it's the wrong approach entirely. And once you see what real learning looks like, you'll never mistake memorization for learning again. Walk across stage. Let me start with a story that reveals the difference. It's the 1960s. Feynman is teaching introductory physics at Caltech. First day of class, and he does something unusual. He asks his students, brilliant students, top of their high schools, perfect test scores, he asks them to define energy. Share the responses pasa, and they give him textbook definitions. Word for word. Energy is the capacity to do work. Energy is conserved in closed systems. Perfect recitation. Exactly what they memorized. And Feynman says, okay, but what is it? Not what's the definition. What is energy? What does that word actually refer to? The silence is silence. They don't know. They can define it. They can recite principles about it. They've memorized extensive information about energy, but they don't know what it is. His demonstration, and so Feynman shows them, not by giving them a better definition, but by building their understanding from scratch. A ball on a shelf. It can fall. When it falls, it can move things, hit things, push things. That ability, that's energy. The ball has it when it's high, uses it when it falls, transfers it when it hits something. It continuous water behind a dam, it can flow. When it flows, it can turn turbines, generate electricity. That ability, that's energy. Different form, same concept. The water has potential, can do things. That potential is energy. The transformation. And suddenly, the students get it. Not a definition, an understanding. They know what energy is. Not what it's called. Not what the textbook says about it. But what it actually is. They make the distinction. That's the difference. That's learning versus memorization. Memorization energy is the capacity to do work words. Recitable. Meaningless. Learning building a mental model. Understanding what the word points to. Seeing it in multiple contexts. Knowing it deeply enough to recognize it everywhere. A fact, direct statement, and Feynman never memorized. He only learned. He built understanding. Always. Without exception. Acts present the framework key. So how do smart minds learn? What's the actual process that creates understanding instead of memorization? Let me show you the 4 stages. The progression that turns information into genuine knowledge. The way Feynman approached everything he learned. Stage 1, build a mental model. This is where learning begins. Not with memorization, with model building. Creating an internal representation of how something works. Explain a mental model is a simplified version of reality that lets you reason about something. It's not perfect, but it's functional. It lets you predict, explain, understand. Make it concrete, learning how atoms work. Don't memorize. Atoms consist of a nucleus containing protons and neutrons, surrounded by electrons in orbitals. Build a model, picture a tiny solar system. Nucleus in the center, electrons orbiting. Not accurate, but functional. Gives you something to think with. Then refined electrons aren't really orbiting. They're more like clouds, probability distributions. Refine the model. Now it's more accurate but still usable. I give Feynman example. Feynman learning quantum mechanics, he didn't memorize equations. He built visual models, mental pictures of what was happening. Particles as waves, probability amplitudes, interference patterns. Those models weren't complete representations, but they were enough to think with, to reason with, to solve problems with. Make the contrast, and memorization gives you words. Model building gives you understanding you can use. You can't think with memorized words. You can only recite them, but you can think with models, manipulate them, apply them, extend them. The practice. When you encounter new information, don't try to memorize it. Ask, what's the model? What's actually happening? How does this work? What would I see? Build a mental picture. Create a functional representation, something you can think with. Act stage 2, stage 2. Connect to existing knowledge. Learning isn't adding isolated facts. It's integrating new understanding into existing structure, like the tree. New growth branches from what's already there. Isaac explained your brain is a network. Everything you know is connected to everything else. When you learn something new, you're not adding a separate piece. You're connecting it to the network, creating links, building bridges. And those are make it concrete. Learning about photosynthesis, don't memorize as an isolated process. Connect it. This is like the solar panels on my roof. Both convert light to usable energy. Different mechanisms, same general principle. This is why plants are green. They're reflecting the light they don't use. The red and blue light gets absorbed. This connects to the food chain. This is where energy enters biological systems. And show the result are. Now photosynthesis isn't isolated. It's connected to solar energy, to color, to ecosystems. That web of connections makes it memorable, makes it usable, makes it part of your understanding. Give Feynman example, and Feynman connected everything, physics to biology, math to physical reality, abstract concepts to concrete examples. Nothing was isolated. Everything fit into an integrated understanding. That's why his knowledge was so applicable, because it was all connected. He could see relationships others missed, apply concepts across domains, transfer understanding. Make the contrast of memorization creates isolated facts. Disconnected, floating free, easy to forget, hard to use. Learning creates integrated knowledge. Connected, part of a web, reinforced by multiple links. Naturally applicable. The practice, when you learn something new, ask, what does this connect to? What do I already know that's similar? How does this fit into what I understand? What relationships can I see? Build connections. Create links. Integrate new knowledge into existing structure. A Fox stage 3 test by reconstruction. Here's where most people go wrong. They test their learning by recognition. Do I recognize this when I see it? That tests memorization, not understanding. Smart minds test by reconstruction. Can I rebuild this from first principles? Can I derive it? Can I explain it without looking? Can I explain the difference? Recognition is easy. Your brain is good at recognizing familiar patterns. But recognition doesn't mean understanding. You recognize your friend's face. But can you draw it from memory? Probably not, because recognition and reconstruction are different capabilities. Airs apply to learning aids. You recognize a formula when you see it. Oh yes, FTMO. But can you derive why that's true? Can you explain where it comes from? Can you reconstruct it from basic principles? If yes, you understand. If no, you've memorized, not learned. Give Feynman example. Feynman never just accepted formulas. He derived them from first principles, every time, until he could reconstruct them without looking. That's how he knew he understood. Not because he could recognize them, but because he could rebuild them. I'll share his test. Can I explain this to someone who knows nothing about it, without looking at notes, using only simple words? If yes, understanding is real. If no, more work needed. Make it practical. After studying something, close the book. Get a blank page. Reconstruct what you learned. Explain it, derive it, build it from scratch. Where you get stuck, that's where your understanding is weak. That's what you need to learn better. Hes continui. This is completely different from memorization testing. Can I recite this versus can I rebuild this? Recitation tests storage, reconstruction tests understanding. Hacking stage 4. Apply to novel situations. The ultimate test, the final stage. Can you take what you've learned and apply it to something you've never seen before? Explain if you've memorized, you can only handle familiar situations. Ones that match what you memorized. Novel situations break you. You don't know what to do. But if you've learned, built models, created connections, tested by reconstruction, you can handle novelty. Because you understand the underlying principles. You can apply them flexibly. I say make it concrete. You memorized how to solve a specific type of math problem. You can solve that exact type. But change one parameter, one condition, one aspect, and you're lost. Because you memorized the procedure, not the principle. But if you understand the mathematics, the actual concepts, the real principles, you can handle variations, novel problems, things you've never seen. Because you're applying understanding, not reciting procedures. As I give Feynman an example, Feynman's genius wasn't solving problems he'd seen before. It was solving problems nobody had seen before. Problems that didn't fit existing categories. Problems that required applying principles in new ways. He could do that because he understood principles, not just memorized solutions. He could take what he knew and apply it creatively to novelty. Make the practice after learning something. Find novel applications, problems you haven't seen, situations that don't exactly match the examples. Force yourself to apply the principles creatively. That's where real understanding is tested. That's where you discover if you learned or just memorized, or could bring stages together. So those are the 4 stages. 1. Build a mental model. 2. Connect to existing knowledge. 3. Test by reconstruction. 4. Apply to novel situations. Facts make the contrasty. That's learning, real learning. Completely different from memorization. Memorization store information. Recognize it. Recite it. Apply it to familiar situations. Learning build models. Create connections. Reconstruct from principles. Apply flexibly to novelty. Advise or share the transformation. Let me tell you about someone who made this shift. Call him David. David was a medical student. Top of his class. Perfect memory. Could memorize anything. Thousands of facts, drugs, diseases, procedures, all stored perfectly. And he was failing as a doctor. The problem, in clinic, patients didn't present like textbook cases. Symptoms were ambiguous. Multiple conditions overlapped. Nothing fit the memorized patterns exactly. And David was lost. He knew so many facts, but he couldn't apply them because he'd memorized, not learned. He had storage, not understanding. The crisis. His supervisor told him, "You know more facts than I do. But I'm a better doctor." Why? Because I understand medicine. You've just memorized it. That was devastating, but true. The transformation. So David started over, stopped memorizing, started learning, using the 4 stages. His process stage 1, build models. For every disease, he'd ask, what's actually happening in the body? Not the definition, the mechanism, the process. Heart failure not, reduced cardiac output with fluid retention. But the heart muscle is weak, can't pump effectively. Blood backs up, fluid accumulates. Build a mechanical model. Continue your stage 2 connect. How does heart failure relate to other conditions? What's similar? What's different? How do systems interact? Connects to kidney function, to lung capacity, to blood pressure, to medication effects. Everything linked. Integrated, not isolated, continues her stage 3 reconstruct. Close the textbook. Explain the disease from first principles. What's happening? Why? What would you see? What would you do? Where he gets stuck, he knows his understanding is weak. Goes back. Builds better model. Tries again. Continue stage 4, apply to novel cases, real patients, messy presentations. Nothing textbook. Force himself to apply principles flexibly. Reason through ambiguity. The result, 6 months later, David was a different doctor. Still didn't have perfect recall of every fact, but he understood medicine, could reason through novel cases, could apply principles flexibly, could actually help patients. Make the point not because he memorized better, because he stopped memorizing and started learning. They present the deeper truth. Now let me show you why memorization fails and learning succeeds. The actual neuroscience, the way your brain works. Third, explain memory types. Your brain has different types of memory. Short-term memory, temporary storage. That's where memorization lives. Fragile, easily lost, doesn't integrate. And long-term memory, integrated knowledge. That's where learning lives. Durable, connected. Functional, or make the distinction. When you memorize, you're using short-term memory, cramming facts into temporary storage. They might last through the test. Maybe a few weeks, then gone. When you learn, build models, create connections, test by reconstruction, You're building long-term integrated knowledge. It lasts, it's usable, it's actually there when you need it. Isaac shared the mechanism. Long-term memory formation requires understanding, connection, active reconstruction, application. Exactly the 4 stages of learning. Your brain literally requires those processes to create durable knowledge. Memorization bypasses those processes, so it creates weak, temporary storage instead of strong, permanent understanding. Effects make it biological. This isn't about willpower or discipline. It's about brain biology. Your brain wasn't designed for memorization. It was designed for understanding, for model building, for connection, for reconstruction. Use memorization and you're fighting your brain's design. Use learning and you're working with it. Address the school problem. So why do schools teach memorization? If learning is so much better, why does education focus on storage and recall? Ahar explained, because memorization is easy to test. Multiple choice. Short answer. Fill in the blank. Can you recognize this? Can you recite that? Easy to grade, easy to standardize, easy to scale. Learning is hard to test. How do you test model building? How do you measure integrated understanding? How do you grade reconstruction ability? It's subjective, time-consuming, hard to standardize.
Hey, make the point.
So schools optimize for what's easy to test. Memorization, not what actually creates capability. Learning. And students learn to optimize for tests, memorize for the exam, forget after, repeat, are the consequence of 12 years of education. 16 if you count college. And most of what you learned is gone, because it was memorized, not learned. Stored temporarily, not understood permanently. The liberation. But you don't have to learn that way. You're not being graded anymore. You're not taking standardized tests. You're learning for your own capability, so you can use methods that actually work. Methods that create real understanding. Methods that build knowledge that lasts. Present practical strategies. Let me give you specific strategies. Ways to ensure you're learning, not memorizing. FAR strategy 1, never highlight or underline. This feels productive, but it's passive. It's not processing. You're just marking text. No model building, no connecting, no reconstructing. Instead, after reading a section, close the book. Write a summary in your own words. Explain what you just read. Reconstruct it. That forces actual processing. That creates learning. Strategy 2. Always explain to someone else. The Feynman technique. Explain what you're learning to someone who knows nothing about it. Use simple words. No jargon. If you can do it, you understand. If you can't, you've just memorized words without grasping concepts. Strategy 3. Create your own problems. Don't just solve given problems. Create new ones. Take the principle you've learned and apply it to different situations. Novel contexts, things not in the textbook. That tests whether you understand the principle or just memorize the procedure. Hatter's strategy 4. Build analogies and metaphors. Take what you're learning and connect it to something completely different. What's it like? How is it similar to things you already know? Analogies force you to understand the underlying structure, the deep patterns. Can't create analogies through memorization. The strategy 5, wait before reviewing. This feels wrong, but it works. After learning something, wait, don't review immediately. Wait a day, a week, then reconstruct from memory. That forces your brain to consolidate, to integrate, to move from temporary storage to permanent understanding. Strategy 6, embrace forgetting. When you forget something, that's not failure. That's information. It shows you what wasn't properly learned, what needs better understanding. Relearn it. But this time, build a better model, create stronger connections, test more thoroughly. That forgetting, relearning cycle creates deeper understanding than getting it right once through memorization. Share the meta principle. Here's the meta principle behind all these strategies. Learning requires effort, requires active processing, requires struggle. Memorization is passive, easy, comfortable, and ineffective. I make the distinction. If learning feels easy, you're probably memorizing. If it feels difficult, challenging, effortful, you're probably actually learning. Don't avoid the difficulty. Embrace it. That difficulty is your brain building real understanding. Give Feynman's perspective. Feynman said, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." Creating, building models, making connections, reconstructing from principles, that's learning. That's understanding. If you haven't created your own understanding, you haven't learned. You've just stored someone else's words. Time to tell final story. Let me end with one more story. This one shows the ultimate difference between memorization and learning. Feynman is visiting his son's elementary school, observing a science class. The teacher is teaching about the Tyrannosaurus rex. That's the memorization approach where the teacher asks, "Who can tell me what this dinosaur is called?" Our kids raise hands excitedly. Tyrannosaurus rex! Very good! And what does Tyrannosaurus rex mean? Tyrant lizard killing. You all know your dinosaurs. Hates Feynman's observation. And Feynman realizes they know nothing about dinosaurs. They've memorized names. But they don't know what a Tyrannosaurus rex was, how it lived, what it ate, how it hunted. What made it different from other dinosaurs? They can recite labels, but they haven't learned anything about actual dinosaurs. Hey, his alternative is ours or later. He talks to his son. What do you know about the Tyrannosaurus rex? It was a tyrant lizard king. Okay, but what does that mean? What was it really? What did it do? I don't know. That's just what it's called. The teaching of, so Feynman shows him, not more names. Understanding. This was a huge predator, bigger than a bus, had tiny arms but massive jaws, could bite through bone, hunted other dinosaurs, was at the top of the food chain. Nothing hunted it, it hunted everything else. Now his son knows something about Tyrannosaurus rex, not just the label, the actual thing. What it was, how it lived. That's the lesson, and that's the difference. That's learning versus memorization. Memorization, know the name, recite the label, pass the quiz. Forget immediately. Learning, understand the thing, build a model, make connections, retain permanently. A7 walk to center, so here's what you need to understand. Stop memorizing. It's not learning, it's storage, temporary, useless, wasteful. Start direct statement. Start learning, build models, create connections, reconstruct from principles, apply to novelty. That's how smart minds actually learn. That's how Feynman learned. That's how genuine understanding is created. The 4 stages again to build mental models. Connect to existing knowledge. Test by reconstruction. Apply to novel situations. Here's the promise to do this and your learning transforms. From temporary storage to permanent understanding. From facts you'll forget to knowledge you can use. From memorization to genuine capability. Hey, my final challenges. So here's my challenge. Take something you're trying to learn right now. Something you've been memorizing. Stop. Throw away the flashcards. Forget about memorizing the definitions. Instead, build understanding. What's the mental model? What connections can you make? Can you reconstruct from principles? Can you apply to novel situations? As or make the prediction, it will be harder, more effortful, more challenging than memorization. But it will actually work. The understanding will stick. The knowledge will be usable. The learning will be real. Final statement. Smart minds don't memorize, they learn. They build. They connect. They understand. Pause. Stop memorizing. Start learning. Thank you. RBT. If you want to understand more about Feynman's approach to learning, the specific techniques he used, the detailed methods for building understanding instead of memorizing, do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how to actually learn, how to build genuine understanding, how to create knowledge that lasts. Join us. Let's stop memorizing and start learning together. See you in the next one. Same equations, same concepts, same knowledge. But if I gave one to a genius and one to an average student, the genius would understand it completely while the student would memorize words without understanding anything. Why? Not because the genius is smarter, not because they have better memory, not because they work harder, because the genius uses a different language rule. A rule so simple it sounds stupid. A rule so obvious it gets ignored. A rule that completely changes how information transforms into understanding. If I put books down, Richard Feynman discovered this rule, not in a lab, not through formal study, but through frustration, through watching brilliant students memorize complex terminology while understanding nothing, through seeing education systems teach words instead of ideas. That's a direct address, and that rule, that single rule, is why he could explain quantum mechanics to anyone. Why his lectures became legendary. Why he understood physics more deeply than people who'd studied longer. Why he could solve problems others couldn't touch. Today, I'm going to reveal that language rule, the rule geniuses use, the rule schools completely ignore. And I'm going to show you how to use it yourself. You lean in here, because right now, Right now, you're probably using language the way schools taught you. The way that creates memorization without understanding. The way that lets you sound smart while knowing nothing. The way that wastes years of your life learning words instead of ideas. And once you see the rule, once you understand what geniuses do differently, you'll never use language the same way again. Walk across stage. Let me start with the story that reveals everything. It's the 1950s. Feynman is in Brazil, teaching physics at the University of Rio, and he's shocked by what he discovers. The students are brilliant. They can recite complex physics terminology flawlessly. They ace exams. They get perfect scores on tests that would destroy American students. And they understand absolutely nothing. Build the scene. Feynman gives them a problem, a simple problem. Apply the physics concepts they've been studying to a real-world situation. Something that requires understanding, not just memorization. And they can't do it all. They're completely lost. Magdasha shares his confusion, so he investigates. How is this possible? They know all the terminology. They can define every term. They can recite the principles. What's missing? And he discovers something devastating. They've learned words without meanings. They can say coefficient of friction, but they don't know what friction is. They can recite Brewster's angle, but they have no idea what it describes. Price, make the point they've been taught to memorize language, technical language, impressive language, the language of physics. But nobody taught them what that language actually refers to, what it means, what reality it describes. And that's what revealed the discovery. And that's when Feynman realizes there's a rule about language that makes all the difference. A rule he's been using instinctively. A rule these students never learned. A rule schools actively violate. Hunter present, the rule is this: never learn a word without learning what it points to. Pause, let it land, that's it. That's the rule. Sounds almost too simple, doesn't it? But this simple rule is the difference between genius, level understanding, and educated ignorance. Between actually knowing something and just being able to talk about it. I first explain deeper. Here's what most people do, what schools teach you to do. You learn words, you learn definitions, you learn terminology, you memorize what things are called. Photosynthesis is the process by which plants convert light energy into chemical energy. You memorize that, you can recite it, you know the word, you know the definition. But do you understand photosynthesis? Do you know what's actually happening? Could you explain it without using the word photosynthesis? Could you describe the actual process? How make the distinction? And most people can't. Because they learn the word without learning what it points to. They know the label without knowing the thing. That's not understanding. That's vocabulary. And vocabulary isn't knowledge. Hake share what geniuses do but geniuses, Feynman, Einstein, all of them, they refuse to learn words without meanings. They refuse to memorize terminology without understanding what it refers to. When they encounter a word, they don't just learn the definition. They learn what the word points to, the actual phenomenon, the real thing, the concrete reality behind the abstract label. Faster give examples. Feynman encounters the term electromagnetic radiation. He doesn't just memorize electromagnetic radiation is energy that travels through space as waves. He asks, what is this actually? What's really happening? What would I see if I could see it? How does it work? What's the mechanism? He builds a mental picture, an understanding, a model of the actual phenomenon, and only then does the word electromagnetic radiation mean something to him. Make the contrast. The word doesn't mean a definition. The word means the actual thing it points to, the real phenomenon, the concrete reality. That's the rule. Never learn a word without learning what it points to. At present, the problem with schools, and schools violate this rule constantly. Systematically, they teach words without meanings, labels without reference, definitions without understanding. I've give examples by biology class. Mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell. You memorize that. You can recite it on the test. But what does it mean? What's actually happening? How do mitochondria produce energy? What's the mechanism? Schools don't teach that. They teach the label, the slogan, the word. I continue in history class. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1919. You memorize that. But what was the Treaty of Versailles? What did it say? Why did it matter? What were the actual consequences? Schools teach dates and names, not what those dates and names refer to. Continue math class. The quadratic formula is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You memorize that. But what is it for? When do you use it? Why does it work? What problem does it solve? Schools teach formulas, not what formulas mean or why they exist. Make the devastating point, our schools teach language, just language, words, terms, definitions, labels, and they call that education. But it's not education, it's vocabulary training, and vocabulary without understanding is worse than useless, because it creates the illusion of knowledge while providing none. Share the consequences. This is why people can have degrees and understand nothing, why students can pass exams and fail to apply knowledge. Why education often doesn't transfer to real-world capability. Because they learned words without learning what words point to. They have vocabulary without understanding. Labels without meanings present the solutioning. So how do you use the language rule? How do you learn like a genius instead of like a student? Let me give you the specific practices. The ways to ensure you're learning what words point to, not just the words themselves. Practice 1E. Practice 1. Explain without using the word. This is Feynman's signature move. Take any concept. Try to explain it without using the technical term for it. Make it concrete. Explain photosynthesis without using the word photosynthesis. If you can do it, if you can describe what's actually happening using simple words, you understand it. You know what the word points to. But if you can't, if you need the technical term to explain it, you don't understand. You just know vocabulary. Give example. Feynman explaining electromagnetic radiation. There's this thing where electric and magnetic fields kind of dance together, creating waves that move through space. These waves carry energy. When they hit stuff, they can make things happen. Light is one kind of these waves. No fancy terminology, simple words. But the understanding is there. He knows what electromagnetic radiation actually is, not just what it's called. Make the test. Can you explain the concepts you think you know without using their technical names? Try it. You'll discover how much is vocabulary and how much is actual understanding. Practice 2. Practice 2. Connect to concrete examples. Every concept, every word, every idea, connect it to something concrete, something real, something you can point to or picture or experience. Abstract words without concrete connections are empty. They're just sounds, meaningless. Make it concrete. Entropy is an abstract word. Doesn't mean much by itself, but connect it. When you drop food coloring in water, it spreads out. It never unspreads. That's spreading, that tendency toward disorder. That's entropy. Now the word means something. It points to something real, something you can visualize and understand. Give Feynman example. If Feynman always connected abstract concepts to concrete examples. Energy wasn't just a definition. It was balls rolling down hills, springs compressing, water falling, heat flowing. Concrete things he could point to. Those connections made the word energy mean something real instead of just being an abstract term. Can make the practice for every word. Find concrete examples. What does this word point to in the real world? Where can I see this? What's an example I can touch or visualize or experience? Without concrete connections, words are just empty sounds. Practice 3 to ask, what would I see? This is powerful. When you encounter a word or concept, ask, I could see this happening. What would I see? Force yourself to visualize the actual phenomenon, not the definition, the thing itself. What is electricity? Don't recite the definition. Ask, if I could see electricity moving through a wire, what would I see? Electrons moving. Little charged particles flowing, like water through a pipe, but these are particles with charge. That's understanding. That's knowing what the word points to. Hard continue quiz. What is evolution? Don't recite Darwin. Ask, if I watched evolution happening over thousands of generations, what would I see? I'd see small changes accumulating. Individuals with slightly better traits having more offspring. The population gradually shifting over time. That's understanding. That's the actual phenomenon, not just the label. Give Feynman's practice. Feynman did this constantly. He'd build mental movies of what was happening. Electrons bouncing, atoms vibrating, forces pushing, actual things doing actual things. The words were just pointers to those movies. The understanding was in the movies, not the words. Practice 4. Explain to a child. This is the ultimate test. Can you explain this concept to a 10-year-old? Using only words they'd understand. without jargon. If yes, you understand it. If no, you just know vocabulary. Why explain why this works? Say children don't know technical terms. They don't have the vocabulary. So you can't hide behind jargon. You can't use fancy words to fake understanding. You have to actually know what you're talking about. Know what the concept points to. Know the real thing behind the label. Give example explaining quantum mechanics to a child. Really tiny things like atoms behave weirdly. They can be in two places at once, kind of. They're fuzzy instead of definite. They only become definite when you look at them. Is that complete? No. Is it perfectly accurate? No. But it captures something real about the phenomenon. It points to the actual weirdness, not just uses the label. Monsieur Hart make the point. If you can explain something to a child, really explain it, not just simplify the jargon, you understand it. Because you know what it points to, not just what it's called. Practice 5C, practice 5A, build from first principles. Don't accept definitions. Build up from basics, from things you already understand. Connect new words to existing understanding. Make it concrete-ish. Acceleration doesn't start as a definition. It starts as, when you're in a car and it speeds up, you feel pushed back in your seat. That's acceleration. The change in how fast you're going. That's concrete. That's experiential. That's connected to something you already know. Then you can build on it. Acceleration is change in velocity. Velocity is speed with direction. Change in speed or change in direction. Both are acceleration. Now the word has meaning. It points to something you can feel and understand. Except Richard Feynman example of Feynman built everything from first principles. He never just accepted definitions. He'd start with the simplest things he knew and build up, connect, extend, create understanding from the ground up. That's why his understanding was so deep, because every word, every concept was connected to a foundation of actual understanding, not just sitting on top of memorized definitions. Bring together the practices. So those are 5 practices. Explain without using the word. Connect to concrete examples. Ask, what would I see? Explain to a child. Build from first principles. Make the promises, use these practices, and you'll learn like a genius. You'll understand deeply instead of memorizing superficially. You'll know what words point to instead of just knowing the words. Tell transformation story. Let me tell you about a student who discovered this rule. Call Lisa. Lisa was pre-med, memorizing everything. Thousands of terms, definitions, technical vocabulary, getting good grades because she could recite everything perfectly. But she didn't understand medicine. She knew the language of medicine, but not what that language referred to. Then she started clinical rotations, real patients, real situations, and she was lost. She knew the terms. Congestive heart failure, a myocardial infarction, pulmonary edema. She could define them all. But what were they? What was actually happening in the body? What would she see? What should she do? She didn't know. She'd learned words without learning what they pointed to. The discovery, then she learned about Feynman's language rule, and she started over, relearning medicine. But this time learning what words pointed to, not just the words. Her practice, congestive heart failure. What is that? Not the definition. What's actually happening? The heart isn't pumping strongly enough. Blood backs up. Fluid accumulates in lungs and tissues. The patient can't breathe well. Their ankles swell. Now she understood. The words pointed to something real. Something she could visualize. Something she could work with. Has the transformation, as she did this with everything, every medical term, connect to concrete reality. Visualize what's happening. Build understanding, not just vocabulary, and her clinical performance transformed. She went from lost to competent, from memorizing to understanding, from reciting terms to actually knowing what was happening in patients' bodies. The result, 3 years later, she's one of the best residents in her program, not because she memorizes better, because she understands deeply, because she learned what words point to instead of just learning words. Make the universal point that's available to you. That transformation, that shift from vocabulary to understanding, that ability to actually know instead of just being able to talk about things. Address deeper implications. Now let me show you why this rule matters beyond just learning, why it's about clear thinking, not just education. Or the confusion problem. When you learn words without meanings, you create confusion, in yourself and others, in entire fields of study. Because you can talk about things without knowing what you're talking about. You can use impressive language while meaning nothing. You can create the appearance of knowledge without substance. I'll give example. Someone says, "One need to leverage our synergies to optimize stakeholder engagement." That sounds smart. Uses business terminology. But what does it mean? What's the actual thing being suggested? Strip away the jargon. Most should work together better to keep people happy. Was all that fancy language necessary? No, it was hiding the absence of specific ideas. Make the point, this happens everywhere. In business, in academia, in politics. In any field where people can use jargon without meaning, they're violating the language rule. Using words without knowing what they point to. And it creates confusion, not clarity. Give Feynman's approach. Feynman refused to do this. If he couldn't explain something simply, if he needed jargon to discuss it, he assumed he didn't understand it, and he was usually right. The need for jargon usually signals lack of understanding. Real understanding can be expressed simply. Barzar, the communication problem. When you use words without knowing what they point to, you can't communicate. You can exchange words, but you're not sharing understanding. Give example, two people talking about quantum entanglement, both using the term, both nodding, both feeling like they're having a conversation. But ask them to explain without jargon. Ask them what they're actually talking about, and often they realize they weren't communicating at all, just exchanging words without shared understanding. Mayer make the point, real communication requires knowing what words point to, requires shared understanding of the actual things being discussed, not just shared vocabulary. But let's give the diagnostic. If you're using jargon and the conversation feels empty, if you're exchanging words but not ideas, that's a sign you're violating the language rule. Stop using the fancy words. Try to express the actual ideas simply. Often you'll discover there weren't any actual ideas, just vocabulary. Through the thinking problem. Most critically, when you use words without knowing what they point to, you can't think. Not really. Not effectively. Thinking requires manipulating ideas. You can't manipulate words. Words are just labels. You need to manipulate the things the words point to. Make it concrete as, you can't think about mitochondria if mitochondria is just a word to you. You can only think about the actual cellular structures and processes that word refers to. The thinking happens with the things, not the words. The words are just convenient labels for referring to things while you think about them. Awesome give Feynman example. Feynman thought in pictures, in mechanisms, in processes, not in words. When he solved problems, he wasn't manipulating terminology. He was manipulating his understanding of actual phenomena. The words were just labels he used after the thinking was done. Haders make the warning if your thinking feels like you're just rearranging words, just shuffling terminology around. You're not really thinking. You're just playing with labels. Real thinking requires knowing what the labels point to, manipulating the actual ideas, not just the words. Sachs addressed the sophistication trap. There's a trap here, a big one. The trap of mistaking sophisticated language for sophisticated thinking. Eufax explained the trap fee using fancy words feels smart, sounds impressive, makes you seem knowledgeable. So there's enormous social pressure to use jargon, to adopt technical terminology, to sound sophisticated. But sophistication of language doesn't equal sophistication of thought. Often it's the opposite. Our set give the insight, the smartest people, Feynman, Einstein, Hawking, they explain complex ideas simply. They didn't need fancy language because they understood deeply. Their sophistication was in the ideas, not the words. Less smart people. They use fancy language to hide lack of understanding. They adopt jargon to sound knowledgeable without being knowledgeable. Tertiary make the test. If someone can't explain their ideas simply, they probably don't understand them. They've learned impressive words without learning what those words point to. Akshay share final Feynman story. Late in his career, Feynman is at a physics conference. Famous physicists presenting their latest work, using extremely technical language, impressively sophisticated terminology. And Feynman keeps asking, but what does that mean? What's actually happening? Can you explain it without the jargon? Sayek continues, most of them can't. They've learned to speak the language of physics without understanding what that language points to. They can manipulate equations without knowing what the equations describe. And Feynman exposes this, not to embarrass them, but because he genuinely can't follow discussions based on words without meanings. The lesson. He needed to know what words pointed to. Otherwise, they were just sounds, just noise, just empty labels with nothing behind them. That's the language rule in action. That insistence on knowing what words point to, not just knowing words. Ek walk to center he, so here's the rule. Never learn a word without learning what it points to. Make it practicar starting today, apply this rule. Every time you encounter a new word, a new concept, a new term, don't just memorize the definition. Ask, what does this point to? What's the actual thing? What would I see? How would I explain this simply? What's a concrete example? Make the promise do this consistently, and your understanding will deepen dramatically. You'll stop accumulating vocabulary and start building knowledge. You'll stop sounding smart and start actually being smart. The challenge to take one field you think you know, one area where you use impressive terminology, and test yourself. Can you explain the key concepts without using the jargon? Can you describe what those fancy words actually point to? Can you explain it to a child? Make the prediction. You'll probably discover you know less than you thought. Much of what you considered knowledge is just vocabulary, labels without meanings, words without reference. But that discovery is good, because now you can go back and learn properly. Learn what words point to. Build real understanding instead of fake sophistication. Final statement color. The language rule geniuses use. Never learn a word without learning what it points to. Schools ignore this rule. They teach vocabulary without understanding, labels without meanings, words without reference. Direct addressio. But you don't have to learn that way. You can use the genius rule. You can insist on understanding what words point to before you use them. Epazi, that's the difference between sounding educated and being educated. Between knowing words and knowing things. Between vocabulary and understanding. Avier Smiley used the rule. Know what words point to. Build real understanding. Thank you. And if you want to understand more about how Feynman thought, how he used language, how he built understanding, how he learned so deeply, do me a favor, like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're exploring how to think clearly, how to learn genuinely, how to understand deeply instead of just memorizing impressively. Join us. Let's use the language rule together. See you in the next one. I don't mean you've lost the ability. I don't mean your brain stopped working. I mean something has been taken from you. Something fundamental. Something that made learning natural when you were a child. And you don't even know it's gone. Walk forward. When you were 5 years old, you were a learning machine. You absorbed language without trying. You figured out how things work by playing with them. You asked why 100 times a day. You learned constantly, effortlessly, joyfully. And then something happened. School happened, tests happened, grades happened, performance anxiety happened, the fear of being wrong happened, us direct address, and now you struggle to learn anything new. You buy courses you never finish. You start books you never complete. You have goals to learn skills that stay perpetually on your someday list. It's not laziness. It's not lack of intelligence. It's not even lack of time. It's that something fundamental has been broken. And until you understand what was taken from you and how to get it back, you'll keep struggling. At pauses today, I'm going to show you exactly what happened. I'm going to show you what Richard Feynman understood about learning that most people never discover. And I'm going to show you how to fix it, because the ability to learn isn't gone. It's just been buried. And we're going to unbury it. Walk across stage A, or let me tell you a story. This story is about Feynman, but it's really about all of us. It's the 1960s. Feynman is teaching at Caltech. Brilliant students. Top of their class, they've aced every test. They're supposed to be the best learners in the world. And Feynman gives them a simple problem. A really simple problem. Something any physics student should be able to solve. They can't do it. Hey, pause. Not because they're not smart. Not because they didn't study. But because they never actually learned. They memorized. They performed. They optimized for tests. But they never learned. Share what Feynman did. Feynman asks one student, "Can you explain this concept to me in simple terms?" Like you're teaching a child, the student launches into technical jargon. Complex terminology, textbook language. Feynman stops him. No, simple terms. What's actually happening? The student can't do it. He knows all the words. He can recite the equations. He passed the tests. But he doesn't understand what any of it means. Ray make the point, and that's when Feynman realized the education system had broken these students' ability to learn. It had trained them to perform instead of understand, to memorize instead of think, to optimize for grades instead of knowledge. They couldn't learn anymore. Not really. They could only perform. Farce or direct statement he is, and that's what happened to you too. Somewhere along the way, you stopped learning and started performing. You stopped trying to understand and started trying to get it right. You stopped being curious and started being afraid of being wrong. And that shift, that fundamental shift from learning to performing, that's why you can't learn anymore. Oh, Sajid, get intense. Let me show you exactly how this happens. Let me show you the 5 things that were taken from you. The 5 abilities that made you a natural learner as a child, but that schools systematically destroyed. Because once you see what was taken, you can take it back. As present first one piece. The first thing that was taken from you, the ability to be confused. When you were a child, confusion was just part of learning. You didn't understand something. You sat with it. You played with it. You eventually figured it out. Confusion was the starting point, not the ending point. Contrast. But then school taught you confusion is failure. If you don't understand immediately, something is wrong with you. You should feel embarrassed. You should hide your confusion. Tests reinforced this. You had to know the answer right now. No time for confusion. No time for figuring things out. Just perform or fail. Make the impact clear Hicks, and over years of this conditioning, you developed an intolerance for confusion. Now, when you encounter something you don't understand, your brain panics. I should know this. I should get this. What's wrong with me? And you quit. You give up. You move on to something easier. So that's why you can't learn anymore. Because learning requires confusion. Learning lives in the space of not knowing. And you've been trained to flee from that space as fast as possible. Share Feynman example. Feynman loved confusion. When he encountered something he didn't understand, he got excited. Oh, interesting. I don't understand this yet. Let me figure it out. Not yet. Like he was ashamed. Yet. Like it was an opportunity. He would sit with confusion for days, weeks, years sometimes, not anxious about it, curious about it, make the point, and that's the ability you need to reclaim. The ability to be confused without panic, to sit in not knowing without anxiety, to treat confusion as the natural beginning of learning, not as evidence of inadequacy. Asa moved to second, the second thing that was taken from you, the ability to play. Children learn through play. They don't study walking. They play with balance. They don't study language. They play with sounds. They don't study social interaction. They play with other kids. Play is learning. Learning is play. They're the same thing. I show what happened but school separated them. Learning became serious. Play became the opposite of learning. You play when work is done. You play to take a break from learning. Tests made this worse. You can't play your way to the right answer. You have to be serious, focused, disciplined. Make the impact clear, and over time, you forgot how to learn through play. Now, when you try to learn something, you make it grim. You make it serious. You make it work, and your brain resists. Because brains don't want to work. Brains want to play. That's when they're most engaged. That's when they learn best. Most share example that Feynman learned physics by playing with it. Literally playing. He'd imagine particles as little balls. He'd make up games about how they might interact. He'd doodle and sketch and wonder. What if? He wasn't being rigorous. He wasn't being academic. He was playing. And that play led to Nobel Prize winning insights. Contrasted, but you. When you try to learn coding or a language or a new skill, you don't play with it. You follow a curriculum. You do exercises. You take it seriously. And it feels like drudgery. And you quit. The loss make the point. That's the second ability you need to reclaim. The ability to play with what you're learning. To approach it with lightness. To experiment without goals. To explore without pressure. Move to the third thing that was taken from you, the ability to be wrong. Children are wrong constantly. They say words incorrectly. They misunderstand how things work. They make mistakes dozens of times a day. And they don't care. They just keep trying, keep experimenting, keep learning. Show what change it but school made being wrong dangerous. Every wrong answer was marked in red. Every mistake lowered your grade. Every error was evidence against you, so you learned to avoid being wrong at all costs. How you make the impact, and now, as an adult, you're terrified of mistakes. You won't try something unless you're sure you'll do it right. You won't speak in a new language until you're confident. You won't attempt a skill until you've studied it thoroughly. You're not learning. You're protecting yourself from the feeling of being wrong. But here's the truth: being wrong is the only way to learn. Every right answer you ever reached, you reached by being wrong first. Every skill you ever mastered, you mastered through mistakes. Share Feynman insight. Feynman said, "I'd rather have questions I can't answer than answers I can't question." He loved being wrong, because being wrong meant he was learning something. His understanding was updating. His model of reality was getting more accurate. Contrast. But you've been trained to hate being wrong, to avoid it, to feel shame about it. And that's why you can't learn anymore, because learning is being wrong repeatedly until you're right. Move to fourthies. The fourth thing that was taken from you, the ability to learn at your own pace. Children learn when they're ready. Some walk at 10 months, some at 15 months. Doesn't matter. They learn when their body and brain are ready. Facts show what school did but school imposed arbitrary timelines. Everyone learns algebra at age 13. Everyone learns to read by age 7. Doesn't matter if you're ready. Doesn't matter if you need more time. And if you fell behind the timeline, you were labeled slow learner, needs extra help, below grade level, make the impact. So you internalize this: you should learn things at a standard pace. If something takes you longer than expected, something is wrong with you. And now, when you're learning something new, you're not actually trying to learn it. You're trying to learn it fast enough, at the normal pace, at the pace other people learn it. Get direct, and when you can't keep up with that imaginary timeline, you think, "I'm too slow, I'm not good at this isn't for me," and you quit. Facts share the truth. But here's what Feynman understood: learning has no timeline. Some things click immediately. Some things take years. Doesn't matter. What matters is that you're learning, not how fast you're learning. Give example. Feynman spent years working on problems sometimes. Years. Not because he was slow, but because he was thorough. Because he was learning deeply instead of quickly. The students who learned quickly, they got surface knowledge. They moved on before understanding deeply. Feynman learned slowly, and he understood deeply. And that deep understanding made him a genius. Make the point as that's the fourth ability to reclaim, the ability to learn at your own pace, to not judge yourself by arbitrary timelines, to measure progress by depth of understanding, not speed of completion. Move to fifties, and the fifth thing that was taken from you. This is the most important one, the ability to be interested for its own sake. Children are interested in things just because they're interesting. Why is the sky blue? Not because it'll be on a test. Because they want to know. Pure curiosity, intrinsic interest, learning for the sake of learning. Show what happened, but school killed that. It made learning transactional. You learn to get grades, you learn to pass tests, you learn to get credentials, you learn to get jobs. The interest itself doesn't matter. What matters is the outcome, the reward, the external validation. Make the impact devastating, and over time, you lost the ability to be interested in things for their own sake. Now, when you think about learning something, you immediately ask, what will this get me? How is this useful? What's the ROI? If you can't justify it with external rewards, you don't learn it. You pauses. And that's why you can't learn anymore. Because real learning, deep learning, requires intrinsic interest. It requires caring about the thing itself, not just what the thing will get you. Share Feynman example. Feynman learned things that had no practical value. He learned to play bongos, he learned to draw. He learned about Mayan hieroglyphics, not for any reason, just because they interested him. And you know what? Those useless pursuits made him better at physics, because they kept his mind flexible. They kept his curiosity alive. They kept him in the habit of learning for learning's sake. Make the contrast, but you won't learn something unless you can justify it, unless it's productive, unless it moves you towards some goal, and so your learning becomes narrow, instrumental, joyless. And eventually, you stop learning entirely. Bring it together. So those are the 5 things that were taken from you. The ability to be confused, the ability to play, the ability to be wrong, the ability to learn at your own pace, the ability to be interested for its own sake. Direct statement. And until you reclaim these abilities, you'll keep struggling to learn. You'll keep starting courses you don't finish, buying books you don't read, making plans to learn skills you never develop. Not because you can't learn, but because you're trying to learn with broken tools. Get hopeful, but here's the good news: you can fix this. You can reclaim these abilities. You can become a natural learner again. Let me show you exactly how. Present the solution. First, embrace confusion. Actively practice sitting with not knowing. Next time you encounter something confusing, don't flee, don't panic. Just notice, I'm confused. That's okay. That's where learning starts. Set a timer for 10 minutes. Give yourself permission to be confused for those 10 minutes. Don't try to resolve the confusion. Just sit with it, examine it, get comfortable with it, explain why. Over time, this rewires your brain. Confusion stops triggering anxiety. It starts triggering curiosity. And once that happens, learning becomes possible again. A second solution. Second, make learning playful. Deliberately approach new things with lightness. When you're learning something, ask yourself, how could this be fun? How could I play with this? What would make this feel like a game instead of work? Give example, learning Spanish. Don't just drill vocabulary. Play word games. Make up silly sentences. Have fun with the sounds. Act out scenarios. Make it ridiculous. Learning coding? Don't just follow tutorials. Build something stupid and fun. Make a program that insults you. Make a bot that tells bad jokes. Play with the code. Hey, make the point. When learning feels playful, you engage. When you engage, you learn. Simple. Third solution. Third, celebrate being wrong. Make mistakes on purpose. When you're learning something new, your goal isn't to be right. Your goal is to discover how you're wrong. That's where the learning is. Practical application, and try something you'll probably mess up. Speak in that new language badly. Write terrible first drafts. Solve problems incorrectly. Then figure out where you went wrong. That's learning. That's updating your understanding. That's getting better. Fourth solution. Fourth, ignore timelines. Give yourself permission to learn slowly. When you start learning something, don't ask, how long should this take? Ask, am I understanding deeply? Give framework. If something takes you twice as long as it should, so what? You're not in school anymore. There's no timeline. There's no grade. There's just you and what you're learning. Go slow. Go deep. That's how real learning happens. Fifth solution. Fifth, learn things for no reason. Cultivate curiosity without purpose. Pick something to learn just because it interests you. Not because it's useful. Not because it'll advance your career. Just because you're curious. Give permission. Want to learn about medieval architecture? Do it. Want to understand how birds navigate? Learn it. Want to study the history of coffee? Go for it. It doesn't need to be useful. Being interested is enough. Explain why this matters. When you practice learning for its own sake, you rebuild your natural learning capacity. You remember what it feels like to be curious, to discover, to understand just because understanding is satisfying. And that capacity transfers. Once you're good at learning for fun, you're better at learning for purpose too. Share transformation story. Let me tell you about someone I know. Let's call her Lisa. Lisa was stuck. She wanted to learn data science, bought courses, started tutorials, always quit after a few weeks. For years, she kept trying and failing. She thought, I'm just not good at learning technical things. My brain doesn't work that way. Continue story. Then she learned about these 5 abilities, and she tried something different. Instead of forcing herself through another curriculum, she started playing with data, her own data, tracking things she was curious about, not trying to be right, not trying to be fast, just playing. She let herself be confused, sat with it, explored it, made mistakes, went at her own pace. Share results, and within 3 months, she'd learned more data science than in all her previous attempts combined. Not because she worked harder, but because she was actually learning instead of just trying to perform. She's now a data analyst. Not because she became smarter, but because she reclaimed her ability to learn. Make the point. That's what happens when you fix what was broken. You become a learner again, naturally, effortlessly, joyfully, the way you were before school broke you. Get philosophical cue. Here's what Feynman understood that most people miss. Learning isn't about acquiring information. It's not about performance. It's not about credentials. Learning is about satisfying curiosity, about updating your understanding, about getting closer to truth. Make it personal. When learning is about those things, when it's intrinsic, playful, mistake-tolerant, self-paced, and curiosity-driven, it's natural, it's easy, it's what your brain wants to do. But when learning is about performance, about being right, about meeting timelines, about external rewards, it's forced, it's hard, it's what your brain resists. That direct statement, you can't force yourself to learn the way school taught you to learn. That system was designed to sort and certify people, not to foster actual learning. But you can learn naturally the way children learn, the way Feynman learned, by reclaiming the abilities that were taken from you. Final story. Let me end with one more Feynman story. Late in his life, Feynman is asked, "What made you such a successful learner? How did you understand things so deeply?" And he says something profound. "I never stopped being surprised by things. I never lost that childlike curiosity about how things work." Or pause it. That's it. That's the secret. He never let school break what made him a natural learner. He never stopped being confused and curious and playful and willing to be wrong. Asar, make the connection that those things were taken from you. But they're not gone forever. They're just buried, and you can dig them back up. They walk to center A, so here's what I want you to do, right now, this week. Pick one thing you've wanted to learn but haven't been able to, one skill, one subject, one area of knowledge, and try learning it differently. Give specific instructions. Don't buy a course. Don't make a study plan. Don't set a timeline. Just start exploring it playfully. Let yourself be confused. Make mistakes on purpose. Go at whatever pace feels right. Learn it just because you're interested. Pause. Give yourself 1 month. Just 1 month of learning this way. Learning like a child. Learning like Feynman. Learning with the abilities you were born with, not the performance anxiety school gave you. Make the promise and watch what happens. Watch how different it feels. Watch how much more you learn. Watch how natural it becomes. Because you're not fixing a learning disability. You're removing the obstacles that were artificially placed in front of your natural learning ability. If you get emotional, you were born as a learning machine. Your brain is designed to learn. It's what it wants to do. School didn't make you a learner. School broke your learning, but the learner underneath is still there, still ready, still capable. Final statement: so you can learn. You always could. You just needed to understand what was taken from you and how to get it back. Now you know. Now you can learn again. Pazapai, thank you. Ardaza Beaton. And if you want to go deeper into how to reclaim your natural learning abilities, if you want more techniques based on how Feynman actually learned, do me a favor. Like this video and subscribe to the Mind of Richard Feynman channel. We're uncovering how to learn naturally, deeply, and joyfully. Not through school's broken system, but through methods that actually work with how your brain functions. Join us. Let's become learners again. See you in the next one.
Richard Feynman's IQ was 125, respectable, but unremarkable. At the Manhattan Project, he sat alongside men with IQs over 180. John von Neumann, the mathematician who could perform calculations faster than early computers, IQ estimated at 190. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the theoretical physicist directing the entire operation, IQ north of 180. Edward Teller, the hydrogen bomb architect, certified genius by every metric. By every conventional measure, Feynman was the least intelligent person in the room. His 125 IQ came from Far Rockaway High School aptitude testing, a score he mentioned dismissively in later interviews, almost embarrassed by its ordinariness. Yet within months of arriving at Los Alamos in 1943, something peculiar happened. Senior physicists began lining up outside Feynman's office, not because of his credentials, not because of test scores, because when the hardest problems emerged, when equations refused to surrender, when brilliance alone failed, Feynman had answers. That the certified geniuses missed, the reason why destroys everything you believe about intelligence. Society teaches us intelligence is speed, higher IQ, faster processing, quicker pattern recognition. Schools reward those who memorize fastest. Corporations hire from prestigious universities. Online courses promise master Python in 21 days or learn AI in 1 weekend. This creates a culture that worships shortcuts and venerates genetic intellectual gifts. Walk into any tech company and listen to engineers compete over algorithm speed, prestigious degrees, LeetCode code scores solved under time pressure. The message is clear: fast equals smart. This produces a specific problem. Speed without understanding creates brittle knowledge. Fast thinking misses deep patterns. Credentials substitute for capability. You can memorize React syntax from tutorials and still freeze when the framework updates. You can hold AWS certifications and panic when systems fail in unexpected ways. You can test at genius level and plateau while slower thinkers advance past you. The high IQ trap is real, documented, and career-destroying. Feynman did the opposite. He thought slower. He rebuilt concepts from scratch. He refused to memorize formulas that other physicists accepted as settled truth. While colleagues raced ahead, Feynman stayed behind, reconstructing, questioning, playing with ideas like a child assembles blocks. This approach looked inefficient. His professors worried. His peers dismissed him as plodding. But this produced a different result: deep, transferable understanding that worked across any problem. Slow thinking that outlasted fast intelligence. As documented in James Gleick's biography, Genius: The Life and Science of Richard Feynman, this wasn't personality quirk. It was deliberate method, practiced across 5 decades, refined into a system that beat genetic advantage every single time. To understand how someone with a merely good IQ beat certified geniuses, we need to see what he actually did differently, not what he had, what he practiced. MIT, 1939. Feynman is a graduate student in theoretical physics. The standard path is clear. Attend lectures, memorize equation tables, reference known solutions from textbooks, publish papers that extend existing work incrementally. The students around him, many with higher IQs, stronger test scores, better undergraduate credentials, follow this path efficiently. They check textbooks immediately when assigned problems. They memorize standard techniques. They optimize for speed. Feynman refuses. His advisor, John Wheeler, assigns him a quantum electrodynamics problem involving particle interactions. Other graduate students solve it in hours by checking reference materials. Feynman sits with blank notebooks. He spends 3 full days deriving the answer from scratch, starting from Maxwell's equations of electromagnetism and building upward, line by line, refusing to skip steps or reference shortcuts. Wheeler notices something unusual. Feynman's final solution differs slightly from the textbook answer, but it's correct. More importantly, Feynman can now solve any related problem because he understands the foundation. When Wheeler assigns variations, Feynman adapts instantly. The textbook memorizers can only solve problems identical to examples they have seen. New configurations break them. This reveals something about how intelligence actually works. High IQ provides faster pattern matching against existing templates stored in memory. But physics problems don't repeat exactly. They mutate. Variables shift. Context change. Memorization breaks. Reconstruction adapts. Feynman later explained his approach in "Surely You're Joking, Mr. Feynman." I had a scheme, which I still use today when somebody is explaining something that I'm trying to understand. I keep making up examples. Not memorizing their examples, creating his own. This forces reconstruction rather than recognition. While high IQ, students optimized for speed, memorizing proven formulas. Feynman optimized for understanding, reconstructing logic chains from axioms. His slowness was actually depth. He spent 3 days where others spent 3 hours. But those 3 days built a mental model that worked for 3 decades. The fast students had to rememorize for every new problem type, constantly updating their mental libraries. Feynman never had to update. His foundation didn't change because it was built from principles, not patterns. The same principle applies today when you're learning to code. If you memorize PyTorch syntax from tutorials, you'll freeze when the library updates or when you need TensorFlow instead. If you reconstruct how neural networks actually work from calculus and linear algebra fundamentals, you'll adapt to any framework. The fast path looks efficient initially. The slow path compounds over years. When you're studying for technical certifications, AWS, Azure, Kubernetes, the choice is identical. Memorize enough to pass the test, and you'll struggle with real-world scenarios the certification didn't cover. Understand the underlying distributed systems principles, and you'll solve problems the test writers never imagined. Feynman's method: refuse the shortcut. Build from ground zero. Think slower. Understand deeper. But reconstruction alone doesn't explain how he beat 180 IQ physicists. There's a second pattern, visible at Los Alamos. The Manhattan Project assembles the highest IQ concentration in human history. Von Neumann focuses on explosive lens calculations. Oppenheimer manages theoretical divisions. Teller pursues hydrogen bomb side projects. Senior physicists compete for prestigious assignments, bomb design calculations, theoretical papers that will secure post-war academic positions, work that carries historical weight. Feynman, the youngest group leader and lowest credentialed physicist, chooses differently. He volunteers for tedious problems that others avoid, checking calculations line by line, debugging integration errors, tutoring military technicians who lack physics backgrounds, working through simple mechanical problems that senior scientists consider beneath them. His colleagues see this as career suicide. Why waste time on computational grunt work when you could be advancing theoretical frontiers? But Feynman understands something they miss. These boring problems force him to understand every aspect of bomb physics. While von Neumann focuses narrowly on one mathematical specialty, Feynman learns everything: neutron diffusion, compression dynamics, detonation timing, metallurgy constraints, engineering tolerances. The high IQ specialists become experts in fragments. Feynman becomes expert in the complete system. Within 6 months, the consequences emerge. Integration problems arise, moments when separate systems must work together, and conflicts appear. Von Neumann's lens calculations conflict with Teller's. Compression estimates. Oppenheimer's theoretical models clash with engineering realities. Each specialist understands their piece perfectly, but can't see how pieces interconnect. Feynman sees it, not because his IQ is higher, because his problem selection strategy built broader, deeper models. Hans Bethe, the theoretical division leader, and himself a Nobel laureate, starts routing the hardest integration problems to Feynman, rather than to higher credentialed physicists. As documented in Richard Rhodes' The Making of the Atomic Bomb, Bethe considered Feynman more valuable than specialists with superior test scores, because Feynman could cross boundaries that specialization created. This reveals a second principle. High IQ creates confidence and speed, which produces credential hunting, chasing prestigious problems, high-status assignments, impressive-sounding expertise that looks good on CVs. Feynman's method was opposite. Choose problems for learning, not status. Work on boring. Problems that teach fundamentals. Avoid narrow specialization that produces fragile expertise. This wasn't modesty. It was strategy. While 180 IQ physicists optimized for short-term prestige, papers, recognition, post-war positions, Feynman optimized for long-term capability. The result? When novel problems emerged, specialists were helpless outside their domains. Feynman adapted, not because his brain processed faster, because his learning strategy was wiser. The same principle applies when you're building career skills today. If you chase impressive-sounding roles, senior AI architect, principal blockchain engineer, without understanding fundamentals, you'll panic when technology shifts. These titles look spectacular on LinkedIn, but produce brittle expertise. If you deliberately work on boring foundation problems, data structures, system design, database internals, networking protocols, you build transferable mastery that works across any technology wave. When preparing for career transitions, the choice is identical. Don't optimize for what sounds impressive in job descriptions. Optimize for what teaches complete systems. The senior engineers who survive technology disruptions aren't those with the most prestigious past titles. They're those who understand foundations deeply enough to rebuild expertise in new domains. Work the problems others avoid because they seem tedious. That's where real understanding hides. But there's a third pattern, visible after the war. Cornell University, 1945. World War II ends. Physicists race to publish in the new quantum electrodynamics field. Speed matters. First publication wins credit, academic positions, research funding. The competition is fierce and explicit. Julian Schwinger, a physicist with IQ over 180 and Harvard pedigree, publishes complex mathematical papers quickly. His work is impressive, rigorously proven, mathematically elegant. It wins him immediate recognition and Nobel Prize consideration. But there's a problem. Almost nobody can understand or use Schwinger's equations. They're technically correct, but conceptually opaque. Only specialists can follow his logic. Feynman does the opposite. He spends 4 years developing his diagrams, simple pictures that represent particle interactions visually rather than mathematically. His colleagues grow impatient. Why waste time drawing pictures when Schwinger already solved the problem with equations? Publish or perish. The pressure builds. Feynman refuses to publish until he achieves perfect conceptual clarity. Not mathematical rigor, Schwinger already has that. Clarity. The ability for any physics student to grasp the underlying logic without specialized training. 4 years of refinement, simplification, playing with visual representations until complexity dissolves. Feynman finally publishes his diagrams. The physics community discovers something remarkable. Feynman's pictorial method and Schwinger's mathematical method produce identical predictions. Both are correct, but Feynman's method is teachable. Within years, every physics graduate student learns Feynman diagrams. Schwinger's equations remain historical footnotes studied only by specialists. Both men win the Nobel Prize in 1965 for the same discovery, but Schwinger's work dies with his generation. Feynman's diagrams become the standard method taught worldwide for 75 years and counting. Not because Feynman was smarter, because he prioritized clarity over complexity, simplicity over sophistication, teaching over impressing. In the Feynman Lectures on Physics, he articulated this philosophy. I couldn't reduce it to the freshman level. That means we really don't understand it. This wasn't false modesty. It was epistemological standard. Understanding means ability to explain simply. If explanation requires jargon and complexity, the explainer doesn't truly understand. They're hiding behind sophisticated language. High IQ produces fast, complex articulation, formulaic elegance, mathematical sophistication. This impresses peer reviewers but obscures understanding. Schwinger optimized for impressiveness, complex equations that signal intelligence to academic committees. Feynman optimized for clarity, simple pictures that signal understanding to students. The market rewarded Schwinger short-term. He got prestigious positions, rapid publication, immediate recognition. Reality rewarded Feynman long-term. His work became foundational. His method became universal. His legacy outlasted every rival. This reveals a third principle. Speed and complexity signal intelligence. Slowness and clarity signal mastery. The system rewards the former. Reality rewards the latter. The same principle applies when you're explaining your expertise today. If you use jargon and complex frameworks to sound smart in stakeholder meetings, you signal intelligence but hide ignorance. Anyone can make simple things complex. Mastery is making complex things simple. If you optimize presentations for impressiveness, dense slides, technical terminology, sophisticated models, you win short-term credibility from people who don't understand the domain. If you optimize for clarity, visual diagrams, plain language, concrete examples, you win long-term influence from people who need to act on your insights. When learning any new field, force yourself to explain concepts simply. If you can't draw the idea, you don't understand it. If you need jargon, you're hiding. Feynman's 4-year delay wasn't procrastination. It was the discipline of mastery, refusing to move forward until understanding was complete. But why did this work? What happens when you combine these 3 patterns? When you combine first principles reconstruction, plus deliberate problem selection, plus conceptual clarity, you get something more powerful than high IQ. You get method. Transferable, systematic, improvable method that compounds over decades. This is why Feynman won the Nobel Prize, not because his IQ was highest, but because his method was deepest. While faster minds chase speed, Feynman chased understanding. While certified geniuses competed for prestigious problems, Feynman chose problems for learning. While complex thinkers impressed peer reviewers, Feynman simplified until clarity emerged. The result: his diagrams became universal language spoken by every physicist worldwide. His lectures became the gold standard of pedagogy, still used 60 years later. His problem-solving approach outlived every high IQ rival who burned out, specialized into irrelevance, or published work that died with their generation. But this reveals something deeper about intelligence itself. Intelligence is not fixed capacity. It's not genetic lottery determined by childhood test scores. Intelligence is method multiplied by consistent practice over time. Von Neumann had IQ 190. He could multiply 4-digit numbers instantly in his head, speak 7 languages, fluently recall entire books from memory. By every measure, he was the most intelligent human of his generation. He died at 53. Most of his work became obsolete within 2 decades. His contributions, while real, didn't reshape their fields. Feynman had IQ 125, merely above average. Good, not exceptional. He died at 69. His work defines physics education 40 years after his death. His diagrams remain the standard method. His lectures remain the standard pedagogy. His approach to thinking remains the model for how science should be practiced, not because he was smarter, because he thought better. Freeman Dyson, a physicist who knew both men, wrote that Feynman's genius wasn't intellectual horsepower. It was the power to see things simply, to strip away unnecessary complications and get to the heart of the matter. This power came from method, not genetics. The system worships IQ because IQ is easy to measure. Tests need scalability. Institutions need sorting mechanisms, credentials. It's signal intelligence because employers need hiring shortcuts. This entire apparatus optimizes for speed, fast pattern matching, quick recall, rapid processing. But reality doesn't care about speed. Reality rewards understanding. In his final years, Feynman wrote on his Caltech blackboard, "What I cannot create, I do not understand." This sentence contains his entire method. Understanding means ability to reconstruct from nothing. If you can't build it from first principles, you don't understand it. You've only memorized someone else's understanding. You don't need a high IQ to practice this method. You need patience to think slower, humility to choose boring problems that teach fundamentals, discipline to simplify until clarity emerges. These are practices, not gifts. Learnable, improvable, systematic. The education system will never teach this because education optimizes for credential production, not understanding cultivation. Schools need grades, tests, rankings. This requires speed and standardization. Feynman's method is slow and individualized. It doesn't scale to classroom management. It doesn't produce neat percentile rankings. But for individuals learning on their own terms, it's available completely. When you study technical documentation, resist the urge to copy-paste code examples. Reconstruct the logic yourself from first principles. When you prepare for career transitions, avoid chasing impressive titles. Choose projects that teach complete systems, even if they seem tedious. When you explain your expertise, simplify relentlessly until non-experts understand. If you can't draw it simply, you don't truly understand it yet. Think slower. You'll understand deeper. Over years, depth beats speed every time. Over decades, method beats genetics consistently. Feynman proved this across 50 years of physics. His 125 IQ didn't limit him. It liberated him. Without the arrogance that fast intelligence produces, he stayed curious about basic questions. Without the credential addiction that high achievers suffer, he chose learning over status. Without the complexity trap that geniuses fall into, he simplified until truth emerged visible to everyone. This is available to you, not genetic gifts, not standardized test scores, not prestigious degrees. Just method, reconstruct concepts from scratch until you can build them yourself. Choose boring problems that others avoid because they teach foundational systems. Simplify relentlessly until you can explain ideas so clearly that beginners grasp them immediately. The path is slow, the results compound, and intelligence, it turns out, is less about the brain you were born with and more about the method you practice daily.
If you think you're dumb, congratulations. You just proved you can think. Because the real fool is the one who never asks anything. You're not dumb, and I'm going to prove it to you right now. Every human brain, without exception, starts with the same foundation. No brain comes with a label that says smart or stupid. Physics shows us that the brain is just like any other muscle in your body. If you train it, it grows. If you neglect it, it weakens. There's no fixed destiny written somewhere saying one person was born a genius and another was born to fail. What actually exists are thought habits that either strengthen or weaken your mental power. Now, imagine you never trained one of your legs. What would happen? You'd probably look like those gym guys who only work out their arms and completely forget about leg day. It would be weak, with no strength to run. But that wouldn't mean you were born without muscles. It would only mean you never trained them. The same thing happens with the brain. Most people simply don't train it the right way. They use their brain like a cheap calculator, not like a brilliant laboratory. That's why they feel slow, stuck, incapable. But the truth is, all it takes is changing the way you use your mind to realize you've got infinite potential inside you. Now pay close attention. The first thing you need to understand is that intelligence is not about memorizing facts. Intelligence is the ability to explain things in a simple way. The method is this. If you can't explain something to a child, you don't really understand it yet. And that's the first secret to proving you're not done. When you learn something, try to explain it out loud, as if you were teaching it. That's how you start working out your brain. Just don't forget to train your legs while you're at it, all right? Your brain is forced to organize the internal mess. It takes scattered bits of information like loose Lego pieces and has to build them into a coherent castle. This activates different areas: memory, language, creativity. It's as if regions that usually work separately suddenly come together in a grand orchestra. When you try to explain what you've learned, you're not just repeating it like a parrot. You're rewriting the knowledge inside your own head. And here's the key. If you want to learn any subject more easily, simplify it. The brain loves to turn everything into complications. It almost feels like the harder something sounds, the smarter a person thinks they are. But real intelligence is taking what's complicated and making it so simple that even a child can understand it. Want to see it in action? Take a look at this little monster of an equation. Beautiful, isn't it? Looks like something a NASA genius would scribble on a chalkboard. Just looking at it, most people freeze up and think, that's it, I'm dumb, I'll never get this. But the truth is, what's really happening here is simple. All of that is nothing more than a complicated way of representing basic relationships between numbers. For example, right in the middle of all that chaos, you could say, this is just a fancy way of calculating the difference of two squares. And when you simplify it, it's really just x plus y. What looked like a mysterious equation is simply a sum in disguise. And that's the secret. When you simplify, the brain breathes. It understands the essence. Math isn't about memorizing giant formulas. It's about recognizing patterns. And the same goes for any field: physics, biology, finance. If you learn to search for the essence, the why behind things, suddenly everything becomes clear. No one is dumb when facing a hard problem. What we really have are bad explanations, messy and overcomplicated, that turn something simple into a maze. But when you force your mind to translate things into simple terms, you realize the brain was never the problem. The problem was always the way you were trying to learn. And it's not just in math. We simplify in physics, too. Someone walks in with authority and says, the law of inertia describes that a body in motion tends to remain in motion. Sounds complicated, right? Want me to simplify? It's just this. If you kick a ball, it keeps rolling until something stops it. That's it. In biology, the same story. Someone says in a serious voice, photosynthesis is the biochemical process by which autotrophic organisms convert light energy. Phew, exhausting. Want the simple version? It's just the way plants invented to eat sunlight. Done. No mystery. And you know what's best about all this? This way of learning is actually more fun. Because let's be honest, traditional studying is boring as hell. It's like trying to memorize an entire phone book just to look smart. But when you learn to simplify, when you turn the complicated into something simple, that's when the real fun begins. That's the moment the genius is born, the one who enjoys asking questions, who smiles when discovering the why behind things, who takes pleasure in turning mystery into clarity. Learning is like playing, because when you're having fun, the brain doesn't see it as an obligation. It sees it as a game. And with games, we keep going. Have you noticed? You can play video games for hours without getting tired, but 15 minutes of a boring lecture feels like medieval torture. Why? Because games have challenge, curiosity, fun. When you bring that same spirit into your studies, you unlock a superpower. Imagine this. You take a tough math problem, or some crazy concept in physics, and instead of thinking, "Oh my God, I'll never get this," you think, "Okay, how can I turn this into a joke? How can I explain this to my 10-year-old cousin and make him laugh?" In that moment, you stop being a slave to studying and start becoming its master. And then something magical happens. You actually start looking forward to the next problem. You get curious. You start laughing at your own discoveries. And it's at that exact point that the genius is born, when learning stops being an obligation and turns into fun. And here's the paradox. The secret of intelligence isn't memorizing answers, it's asking why. A person who asks too many questions might seem dumb to others, but what most people don't realize is that curiosity has been essential for every human discovery. If Isaac Newton hadn't asked, "Why did this apple fall from the tree instead of shooting up into the sky?" gravity might never have been formalized. Think about it. What everyone else saw as something ordinary, an apple falling, Newton turned into a question. And from that question came one of the most powerful laws in physics. Albert Einstein? He didn't create the theory of relativity because he memorized formulas. He started by asking, what if I could ride alongside a beam of light? What would I see? A crazy, almost childish question that any serious teacher would have called nonsense. But it was exactly that nonsense that opened the door to one of the most revolutionary theories in history. Even everyday inventions were born this way. Why does water heat up when it boils? Why can a piece of metal turn into an electric current? Why does sound move through the air? Every breakthrough that now feels obvious started with someone annoying the world by asking simple questions. What most people call stupidity is really just the inability to ask. And what they call genius is nothing more than stubborn curiosity. Newton wasn't magical. Einstein wasn't superhuman. They were just stubborn enough to keep asking when everyone else was saying, "We already know that, stop bothering us." And here's the turning point. Genius is born when you take seriously the questions everyone else ignores. If the apple falls, ask why. If the shadow moves, ask why. If a 500-ton airplane flies while a little bird drops dead from a tree, ask why. The more you let those stupid questions bother you, the closer you are to brilliance. And here's a truth almost nobody talks about. You're not dumb for asking. You're only dumb when you care too much about what other people think of you. Because that, deep down, is what kills curiosity. You wanted to raise your hand in class and ask, but then you thought, they'll laugh at me. They'll think I don't know anything. But guess what? It's exactly by not asking that you stay not knowing it. A genius is the person who simply doesn't care. He asks, he gets it wrong, he gets it right, he asks again, until he understands. And here comes a crucial point, emotional intelligence. There's no use in training your brain if you're still a slave to other people's opinions. A brilliant mind isn't just one that understands physics or math. It's one that understands itself. It's the kind of mind that doesn't get shaken by stupid criticism, doesn't compare itself to the neighbor, and doesn't fall apart because someone said, "That's obvious." Pay close attention now. Anyone who lives worried about judgment will never discover anything new. Every bold idea they have, their first thought is what their friends will say, what the family will say, what the experts will comment. The result? They spend their entire lives hiding their questions, and with them, hiding their true potential. You want to be seen as intelligent? Then stop trying to look intelligent. Focus on being curious, on simplifying, on laughing at your own mistakes, and on learning quickly. That is far more rare and far more valuable than pretending to know everything. In the end, the real genius is not the one with ready-made answers, but the one with the courage to ask, the discipline to search, and the maturity not to care about the audience.
The same people who laugh at you today for asking will applaud you tomorrow for discovering what they never had the courage to look for. So, what should you start doing today to train your mind like a genius? First, cultivate curiosity. Ask why about everything. There's no such thing as a stupid question. There's only the fear of looking stupid. And you already know, you're not dumb for asking, you're dumb for caring too much about what others think. Second, practice simple explanation. Every time you learn something, try to teach it out loud as if you were explaining it to a child. If you can't, it means you don't really understand it yet. Go back, simplify it, and explain again. That's the workout that truly strengthens your brain. Third, take action. Just thinking isn't enough. Solve problems, write, test your ideas. Action is the final exam that shows whether you truly understood or if you were just memorizing. Fourth, practice concentration. Stop letting yourself get distracted every 5 minutes. When you focus on one single thing, your mind works like a laser.
Fifth, build self-confidence. Don't wait for applause. Every genius has been called crazy at some point. The difference is they kept going anyway. Curiosity plus simple explanation plus action plus concentration plus self-confidence. That is the manual that proves you were never dumb. You just needed to learn how to use your brain the right way. And remember this, inside your head you carry the same kind of brain that wrote symphonies, that built rockets, that discovered gravity, that decoded DNA. You have a brain capable of finding the cure for cancer, of creating technologies that don't even exist yet, of transforming your life and the lives of millions of others. The problem was never you. The problem was believing you were limited, that you had no talent, that you weren't born a genius. But the truth is, the genius has always been inside you, waiting for you to stop being afraid to ask, to stop going silent in front of what you don't understand. Never forget, every time you ask why, you open a new door inside your mind. Each answer leads to another question, and it's in that endless path that the greatest ideas are born. The world is not driven by those who know all the answers. It is driven by those who have the courage to ask the right questions. So please, never stop asking why. Never let shame or judgment kill your curiosity, because it's exactly that curiosity, that restless spark inside you, that can change everything. You're not dumb. You never were. You're an explorer, and your mind is the greatest unexplored territory that exists. Take care of it, train it, simplify, focus, trust, and keep asking, because every single why could be the beginning of the next great discovery. And now I want you to do something simple but powerful. Leave your comment down below. Write, "I will never stop asking why." Declare it, because every word you write is a commitment to your own growth. And don't forget to like this video, because that shows it truly resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel to keep receiving content that challenges your mind and expands your worldview. Think about it. Maybe a single click today could be the start of a massive transformation in your life. So comment, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Because here you don't just get information, you get tools to think like a true genius.